Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Ridge Talk. This is our podcast where we try to address various things in the life of the church, whether it be greater expansion on some ideas that we're working through in sermons, whether it's answering questions that come in either as a result of something mentioned on a Sunday morning or perhaps just a question that someone has in their mind. And that really is kind of what we're going to be focusing on this morning is a couple of questions that came in from a young person in our congregation who kind of said they recently started paying attention to this podcast. Yeah,
new audience.
And it has spurred some things in their life and spurred some questions. And so I'm actually really excited about that.
Yeah.
We've had a couple different like college age people reach out to us over the course of this podcast and give us some helpful feedback and ask some really good questions. And I personally love the fact that there's that somewhat middle, younger generation kind of exploring what we're doing, taking enough ownership of their faith and their relationship with Jesus to be utilizing this resource and then to be asking questions. That's really, really kind of what our heart for doing this was that it would create another space for engagement, another place where we can have conversations that aren't possible from a stage setting on a Sunday morning.
That's right.
In fact, one of the things that was pointed out was I didn't really pay attention to a Ridge Talk at first because I thought it might just be like sermon format.
Right, sermon
again.
part 2.
Yeah. And thank you for that feedback.
Yep.
It's helpful to us. Thank you for taking the time to submit these questions. And we would just welcome, again, before we read through these, we welcome anybody who's listening to this. If you have questions that you think we might be able to help you with, we welcome those. Most of the questions we've ever gotten, I think we have answered on the podcast. There have been some others that we've either answered privately in a reply or had a follow-up conversation with somebody. But I would say probably 85 to 90% of the questions that we've received over the course of the last several months, we've
been doing it over a year now.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we'll dive in today. There are two questions that this person submitted, and the first one says this. It says, "What does the Bible say about social anxiety? I know it talks a lot about anxiety and socializing, but I found that it is hard to connect the two on my own. When it does talk about being afraid of people specifically, it's usually in the context of someone being sent to people that would generally be seen as intimidating or scary. I'm not sure if I'm just looking in the wrong places, so I was wondering if you guys had any input on that or verses that I could study in regard to that." As I read Jeremiah 1:6-10 yesterday, as I read it, it made me question how I could apply that to my personal and professional life. I've struggled with mental health and still do, and I've only recently decided to be voluntarily involved in life groups and deep relationships at church again. I tend to distance myself out of convenience, and I think that's an important one to hang on to. I tend to distance myself out of convenience, so I find it hard to relate and connect to people, and I tend to be naturally awkward and isolated. I'm freshly a young adult, and I'm putting myself in new situations that require building relationships, such as the young adult life group, but it's a consistent challenge for me to connect with people in my age group. I read this and I see a version of myself at that same age. I really identify with a lot of the things in this question. And so thank you for the vulnerability in this question to not just ask kind of a generic question, but really go to the depths of what you're feeling and experiencing. And one of the things that I appreciate in this question is saying, I tend to distance myself out of convenience, which I think is insightful because it shows a little bit of a wrestling with, hey, some of this feels like maybe a place where I could improve, like I could push past my discomfort and grow in a certain way. And then a couple of these other things that were mentioned, like if mental health struggles and other things, might be things that are a little hard. We would be remiss to say, hey, just try to push past that and grow. I think there's that tension there, which is probably what makes this whole situation feel a little bit confusing or hard to manage, because we're talking about a variety of factors here. It's personality traits, how your brain is wired, how you may receive energy in social situations, or if you're very quickly depleted of energy in social situations, so extroversion, introversion.
How did your family of origin do relationships when you were growing up?
What do you need what do you need after like a conversation? Do you walk away from that feeling energized, or do you walk away from most conversations feeling a bit depleted? And then does that increase in like larger groups? Like for me, I'm a huge introvert, so large group settings drain my social batteries very quickly, and the only solution for me is solitude. I've found no other way to recharge those my social capacity other than solitude. And so that can sometimes get misinterpreted by other people. Hey, you're really quiet, you're really shy. The labels start to kind of come out. And then you sort of take that on and go, well, is this like a deficit in me? Is this something that like I need to fix? I don't know how to fix it. Is it fixable at all? There's all of these factors that I would imagine are kind of swirling around in this moment.
Definitely.
And I think the impulse, I also love the impulse to go, hey, what does Scripture say about this?
Yes.
And Daniel, you had said something about like the ability sometimes of Scripture to address specific things.
Yeah.
We want to unpack that a little bit
so
for us?
I had a couple thoughts. One, I agree with you in affirming this person, and number one, being willing to step out, be vulnerable, and ask the question. Number two, the fact that they're saying I'm trying to engage.
Yeah,
like that's also a good impulse. So I just want to affirm that. That's good, and I want to encourage you in that. What Sean's talking about. So one of the things that I might reframe a little bit, because there is an impulse, and I think it's an impulse that has been driven by how the American evangelical church has taught for decades now, is start with you and your issue, and then let's see where the Bible meets that issue, right? And so that's kind of how the question is framed. It's, I have an issue with social anxiety. Where does the Bible talk about social anxiety in a way that answers and meets my need? And I would just say that I would want to reframe that, because that's not exactly how the Bible works. The Bible is not a self-help book, or it's not a, go to the lexicon and find the issue,
or an instruction manual.
An instruction manual. That might be a better way of saying that. And, but the point is, so the Bible does, I would say the question is, where in the Bible does it specifically, explicitly address social anxiety? And I think the answer is it doesn't. You might see that described, kind of like in the Jeremiah passage, or when Jonah doesn't want to go to Nineveh.
Yeah, you do see people who struggle with it.
Right, but that as a topic and how that can be addressed is not explicitly spelled out.
Yeah, there's not like a step-by-step, here's how you work through this.
There wasn't even, I would even say that's a more modern construct. People wouldn't have used the term social anxiety in the script biblical times. But what the Bible does reveal to us is who God is, how he has designed us, how sometimes that's broken because of, the fall of mankind, and how Jesus answers that, and then how we can follow that in faith. And so, I would just frame it that way, and looking at, well, maybe there's not a passage that talks about social anxiety, but there are certainly passages that talk about God being the God of peace, right? Who overcomes anxiety he will take that from us. I mean, that's one of the great parts of the gospel, right? We exchange our anxiety for the peace that he gives when we turn that over to him. So that's...
And then, the number one command Jesus gave was, don't be afraid. That he said that more than anything else, which, that's 2,000 years ago. He was speaking to a generation of people who knew fear and anxiety in the same way that we do today.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Anxiety and fear are not new. In fact, they came into the world. The reason we experience those is because of our inability to live as God designed us and to experience the world the way God designed it.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I don't know if that's a helpful thing, but I would at least reframe it and say, instead of looking for the places in Scripture that directly address the thing that you're hoping it to address, I would instead see Scripture as a way to encounter God.
Yeah. And what came to mind for me is somebody that feels like I've lived a version of this a bit. I think early 20s up through, even into my early 30s. It started a process for me. And this is what I want to encourage you with. This may very well be the beginning of a beautiful process
Yes.
of discovering more about yourself and who God has made you to be, and then also how he might desire to walk alongside you if there are other compounding issues here that are like maladjustment from adverse experiences, things like that play into this, how God would want to walk alongside of you and bring healing to those areas, but being able to see those areas clearly. And in other areas, which is, if this is just how I'm wired, like I brought up introversion, extroversion, it's not really something like to be changed, and it's not something to be fixed. It's something to be understood. And then you learn how to steward that. You learn how to steward your energy. And so coming to understand the differences between like personality traits and how your mind works, and learning to not feel shame because of those, or to feel like that is some sort of defect, is huge. But then alongside of that, if there are other things that, bad experiences that have contributed to feeling less comfortable around people because maybe you experienced hurt in certain settings, those then are opportunities to invite God to walk alongside you and bring healing to those areas and free you from those things. And so I would say it very well sounds like there are maybe some growth areas here.
Yeah. So, and I just had one other thought.
Yeah.
If you're talking here, Sean, if there was a spectrum of social anxiety, we have just accidentally aligned ourselves on that spectrum. So, Sean, and I love this. You're talking about how you identify kind of with this. By the way, the other thing is, some of the question talks about how this is like, I'm kind of newly a young adult moving into this. I remember young adulthood and like coming into the real world and life change and not in high school anymore. And there is a lot of stress and anxiety associated with that. But social anxiety, this is a true story. On my first day of class, now you got to remember I was homeschooled. Okay, so I didn't have, all I had was home training. On my first day of college, because I wanted to make friends, I showed up 15 minutes early to every class I went to that first week, and I shook hands with everyone and introduced myself to every single student and professor who walked through the door. And people are like, "Who is this weird?" So like as much as you can relate to some of this, I struggle to relate to some of this. But here's the point that I'm making. Over the past couple of weeks, we've talked a little bit in our message series about how every member is a minister of the gospel. Paul picks up on it multiple times, that we are all members of one unified body and individually members of it. And it really takes all giftings and personality types to complete the body.
Yeah.
The fact that I can't relate in a very meaningful way means I need someone who can relate in a very meaningful way. So I just want to. I just thought that was interesting. That I love that at least in this group right here, we have the ability to speak into this from a variety of perspectives, and that's a big part of what it means to like. And so I would say, I'm going back to, I would encourage you and affirm it's good to put yourself out there, even if there's a growth area, if it's uncomfortable for you, because you are no less a part of the body.
Yeah.
And it requires you being there and being part of the body to speak to people in a way that other people can't. The way that Sean's able to speak to this and Justin's able to speak to this in a way that I can't.
I haven't spoken into it yet.
Well, I'd love for you to do that.
I feel like, Sean, I can relate with this question a good bit. And the thought that really came to my mind as I was reading through it was, what is the question behind the question? Because there's always another layer to it. So, if I'm going back into young adult days and just figuring things out,
How long ago was that, Justin?
50, 60 years ago. Yeah. Anyway, when I go back to that, I had to start asking myself the other question. Like, okay, in what environments am I discovering the most social anxiety? And okay, if I go to 5 different environments over a month and I experienced a little bit of anxiety in 3 of them, okay, what was unique about those 3? And what was different about, the other 2? And I just had to ask a lot of those why questions, like, why am I anxious in here but not over here? And even today, and I'm 47, by the way, even today, there will be some of those moments where I'm like,
sure,
why am I anxious in this moment? Why am I feeling tension in my body right now? I don't think anything is going on, but my body's telling me that it is. So I have to pay attention to that and try to figure out what is causing that anxiety and tension in my life right now. So in the same way Sean said, hey, this is like a good place to be, where you're beginning this process of really just digging into the, who am I? How has God made me? Questions. It's a long process.
Yeah.
I remember having a personal mentor in my life over a period of like 18 to 24 months that I was meeting with every other week just to talk through things. And that was insanely helpful to me because they were just able to point out some observations from my life that I didn't notice on my own. They were able to help me answer some of those why questions.
Yeah, I think that's extremely helpful. There are a number of practical things that, if you want to follow up, we can probably send some ideas and resources concerning that. But you just touched on something which is kind of part of the next question,
That's
which
why
is, the importance of, we actually talked about what we were going to talk about ahead of time today.
Wow.
And developed a loose plan. So that perfect segue from Justin was perfect. So
until we talked about it.
I ruined it. So yeah, the second part of that, or the second question that was submitted, relates to that idea of looking for mentorship, looking for greater connection. Again, I don't want to understate the impact of where you are in life. I know that this person is 19, 20, 21 years, somewhere in that range. A lot of things are changing in your life all at once, including your brain is continuing to change through adolescence and process things differently, as well as the environments you find yourself in and all of that. And so I would say don't be in a huge rush to have all of this figured out. Just take some steps as you can. And one of the things that Justin pointed out, which is related to this question, is very important, and that is if there are people who, especially older people who are a little bit further down the line and maybe having worked through some of this, who can bring some wisdom to it, trying to find those relationships and those opportunities for someone to walk with you through that, and maybe to speak into some of the things. Like if you're saying, I feel really anxious in this way, and I think this is like a part of me that might need fixing. If someone were to have that thought, someone else speaking into that and go, no, I actually just see that like as a personality trait and you could steward it this way, might be helpful. Or it might be helpful if you are a person that's like, I really feel like this is coming from a place of where I was wounded in the past, and so I'm feeling this certain way in this environment because it's reminding me of a painful thing in my past. Having somebody who might be able to help you think through that and then help you identify like some healthy next steps for that could be really important. And so that really touches on this second question, which is, as a female, I enjoy the women's ministry, but I've found that we only have a couple to a few events a year. Outside of those events, I don't get a lot of opportunities to meet or catch up with seasoned or older women. I'm not sure if I'm wording this well, but basically I mean that I struggle to find community even at church. I don't know how to get in touch with trustworthy, Christ-like people that I could meet with or become friends with within the church. I'm considering taking on some roles in the future, distant future, she says. So it's important to me that I have someone or more than one person to give me guidance and wisdom during my walk. And so I find that interesting because at the tail end of the first question, it's I'm struggling to connect with people in my age group. And the second question is I would also like to make some connections with some older people outside of my age group. And I would say, like, I don't mean this in any, like, I'm not joking. Like, that's a part of, like, your 20s as you are changing from having all that stuff sort of built in because you're in school, you're surrounded by your peers, as you're navigating this middle ground of, young adulthood. It really is like this great turning in your life from one stage to another, and relationships all kind of get jumbled up in there. And so that's another really vulnerable, insightful question, but the fact that you're asking, like, seeing the need for that and asking that question is great.
Well,
so
it also, like, this wasn't part of our conversation before we hit the record button, but as the community groups person, right? Like, I'm trying to connect people to groups. I'm trying to help people, get into community with other people. One of the challenges that I face is the majority of people want to try to connect with people in their same life phase. That's just the way it is. Like, I'm 47 years old, so I'm going to be connecting with people who have high school, college age kids probably, and are in that life phase. But what history has shown me is that the most fruitful community groups we have are the ones with a lot of diversity in age and income and phase of life. Like, those are the most fruitful groups because people are asking questions of people who are older and people who are younger. Hey, how do you see the world differently than I do at your age? What are some things you've experienced that would help me go through this thing I'm experiencing now in a healthier way? Those are the groups that are the most fruitful. So that's just my side note out there to anybody listening is, hey, connect with people who are different than you, because there is a lot of beauty in diversity and seeing things from different perspectives.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the question kind of assumes, again, more of a programmatic look at discipleship, which we're a church. We try to organize spiritual formation and discipleship. And so, Justin's right. Getting plugged into a group, getting plugged into the women's ministry, those are good things. I'm also aware that it can be more organic than that. So I'll say this: if you are someone who's a little further down the road, you're listening to this, you're an older woman. And by older, I just mean late 20s, like mid 30s. But for sure, even beyond that, a word that in one of the books we've been reading, it's apprenticing. It's literally just passing on what you have learned to the person who's a few steps behind you. And I would encourage you, let's demystify discipleship for a second. It is helping someone who's a few steps behind you take their next steps. And so I would just highly encourage you, if you're listening to this, know that there are young women who, many of them crave, and same with guys. And even if they don't crave it, they should be craving it. They just don't need to know that they crave it. But like, there are people who are craving that input, wise input from older people. I would also say, if you are a younger person, it's okay. If there's someone in your life that you are looking at, you admire their walk, you can clearly see the fruit of following Jesus, it's okay to approach them and to say that. Say, I have noticed fruit in your life and that you are clearly someone who loves Jesus. I would like for my life to look more like your life. Are you willing to spend time with me to tell me how that happens? And I think that's, now for someone who shakes hands with every single person who walks through the door the first day of class, that's an easy thing for me to say.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know, maybe you guys can shed light on, are there other intermediate steps that could help with that conversation? But my point is, it's just okay for me to, I think all I'm trying to say is it's okay to approach someone and to ask them to lead you.
Yeah. I would say this, I thought about that too. It's funny because then I go, well, what about the person who says they have social anxiety? It's really hard. I would say taking the exact step that you just said would actually potentially be a very healthy step for someone struggling with the first issue of, hey, I have trouble. There's one aspect of that which is potentially risky, which is, if I approach this person and let's say they are loving the idea of it, but like for whatever reason they don't have the time or whatever, that can feel like a rejection. Like, oh, hey, this isn't going to work out. So like the inherent, I think, felt risk of taking that step is I don't want to feel rejected by this person or even just like disappointed that it's not working out and now I'm back to square one. I think that learning to take some risk is good. But I would say also, like, if you're someone, I would very much encourage that specific step. Like, take it on yourself. From these questions to this person specifically, you're very self-aware.
Yeah.
These are very self-aware questions for a person your age. And so that tells me that you could be somebody who could figure out how to take that step of asking somebody in a very clear, good way. If that is a lot, that's why we do have, a women's ministry leader who might be able to be that middle person. Like if you've identified someone else and you're like, I don't really know how to have that conversation. Well, then maybe we can help you have that
Facilitate that conversation.
or something like that. But I think either way, there are always, like, our growth is always up to us taking steps towards something. And so in some way, this is going to require
action,
a potentially uncomfortable step toward resolving that. But the benefit might be that you get everything that you're longing for and asking.
So I have a couple of thoughts. One is that my lovely wife Megan is the women's ministry director here at Southridge, and going back right before, I think it was before the pandemic started in 2020, but she had highlighted a number of women specifically to be mentors to help younger women coming up. Like there was a structure and a plan in place for us to offer that here at the church. All things COVID happened. Things kind of, fell apart, fell through the wayside as everybody was isolating. But there are women here, whether it is my wife or others that she knows who would love to take on that role and probably have the time and opportunity and margin to take on that role. So feel free to reach out to Megan and ask her about that. But the other thought that I had is don't be afraid to meet with somebody that you've never met before at the same time.
That's right.
Back when I was looking for a mentor in my own life, I'm talking to people here at Southridge. I'm talking to people who served in ministry in other churches. And, hey, this would be a great person for you to meet with. And I'm like, oh, I don't know that person, but I will meet with them and see how it goes and end up meeting somebody that I meet with on a continual basis for 2 years who has a significant impact in my life.
That's right. Yeah.
So, don't be afraid to go outside the box and accept a recommendation to meet with somebody you've never met before. It might be very fruitful for you.
That's good.
Yeah. All of this requires vulnerability.
Yeah.
And I just want to reiterate that, acknowledge that it takes courage to ask these questions. It's going to take more courage to be vulnerable enough to take some of those steps and risk
There's a great audiobook, by the way, that's titled The Power of Vulnerability by Brene Brown. And it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I benefited from it a lot in my own life. So
Yep.
this podcast is not sponsored by Brene Brown.
Although, if you're watching, Brene,
Give us all your critiques. Hey, well, we appreciate the questions sincerely. We appreciate all those who take the time to watch this. We do it because we really do hope that it is an additive thing to your life. It helps in your spiritual formation. It helps in your relationship with Jesus in a variety of ways. And so we just encourage you guys to keep letting other people know about it, especially this one, like someone who said, hey, I had this perception of what I thought ridgetalk was, and then I watched it and discovered that it's this other thing. Like, tell people about that, because that's helpful, because maybe other people have similar misconceptions. And so we'd invite you to do that. As always, you can subscribe, like, click notifications, find us on any major podcast platform for audio or YouTube for video, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you.